Welcome back to Old War Stories with Uncle Jay. This one is entitled Electronics Class. There's no way to sugarcoat that, really. Anyways, I was in, I guess about the 11th grade. The school that I went to, West Hempstead High School, was built in either 52 or 56. Can't remember. 52 or 54, pardon me. Hadn't been updated since, for the most part. There were some areas of the building that just were never touched. Electronics class was interesting because it was an elective class, which means that you had a number of electives that you had to take. Classes that had to fill certain periods. You had to have a certain number of hours of education, some crap like that. So they had these elective classes. So I took electronics, and they taught us how electricity works, and what a resistor is, and what a capacitor is. And it was the most basic stuff. I had known all of this stuff already, just based on my own experimentation, my own reading, and from what others have told me. So this was an easy class for me, but we had the rejects in this class. Man. There was a girl in there. Now, I'm not saying that girls don't do electronics. There's Fran Blanche. She does. But it's not as common. Just like doctors generally are male, but don't have to be. Nurses generally are female, but don't have to be. Or, of course, anywhere in between nowadays. We have to add you guys in, because otherwise you'll get butthurt. But anyway, that was the deal. There was this one girl. Her name was Faten Youssef. I don't know what nationality that is, but if you read it, it's sort of like fatten yourself. So that was nice. She was one of those girls that was just dumb all over. She was not interested in being in school at all, and God only knows what happened to these people. So we had her and a bunch of other rejects in the class. They were just... Anyway, we learned the most basic of stuff, but the instructor, the teacher, was awesome. He was not Mr. Soman, he was Dr. Soman. Pardon. Dr. Soman was awesome. Now, he comes in and he says, "Hi, this is electronics class. Then he reaches in his pocket, pulls whatever he had in there out. Dr. Soman puts it back in his pocket. Right then and there, I knew we were going to be off to a great start, because that's just awesome. He'd give us written work to do occasionally, tests, quizzes, whatever it were. And he'd time us. He'd give us 10 minutes for us to do it. And occasionally, during those 10 minutes, he'd say, "Take your time, hurry up." It was just brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant, this man. He was really something else. Anyway, he and I got along fantastic. And because I pretty much knew the curriculum to begin with, the class generally went, "Okay, what is the function of a resistor?" So Faten would raise her hand, or he'd call on her. He had a tendency to call on people who didn't raise their hand. So anyway, she said, "It resists things." Yeah. And it would go around like that, and what is the unit of measurement that capacitors are measured in? So you call on John. I don't know. I'm making up names. Ohms? No. You call on Chuck. Volts? Nope. And you call on somebody else. You say amps? And then he'd say, Jason, would you like to tell the class, please? So I had to say farads or microfarads. And he'd say correct. And then we'd go to the next question, and basically it would come back to me to save the day on every question. I'm not an electronics whiz by any means. I know what the parts are. I know what they do. As far as building circuit boards, we actually did that, but it was really, really basic. But, you know, I'm not an electronics whiz, such as, say, rolling TARDIS. Anyway, I'm just not. It wasn't exactly my forte, although I did dick around in it quite a bit. We built a number of projects. It wasn't so much just the learning aspect of it, because we went on to actually building stuff. And one thing I remember just was plagued with problems. I don't know if it came as a kit or what the deal was. Maybe it was a wooden box that was pre-assembled, or we had to assemble it. I can't remember exactly. Just something. And this project required cutting a sheet of plywood. And he taught us what a circular saw was. And then he'd call on somebody to demonstrate the circular saw, them having never used one. So he had one person, and they made a cut. So, I mean, he told them what to do, and they still had the saw like jerk and buck back and all this crazy shit. And then he had another kid do it, and they did an also horrible job. And then he had a third kid do it. And the third kid learned, listened to what he said, learned, and took his time. I've never seen a cut of wood take so long in my life. He went so slow. Was he accurate? Yeah, I think he was. I think he did a pretty good job. Then he called on me. I never used a circular saw before. My cut was smooth, went right through, smooth as silk. I wasn't straight. I wasn't far off, but I wasn't straight. But, you know, stuff like that. Oh, another thing that Soman used to do when he was saying, you know, what are capacitors, the unit of measurement capacitors. So one kid would say volts, he'd say close. Guy was awesome. So anyway, this project, we had to cut the plywood, and then we had a plexiglass front. Plexiglass front. Now, we had the lowest of the low as far as tools in this classroom. We had the dull, old tools that have been around forever. Never been sharpened. Never been cleaned up. Never been oiled. Just the you know, like, how does this even still work kind of tools. And the tables, or benches really, were covered in glue. Like I don't know if it was that class or maybe a woodworking class, they put projects in there to dry, and all the glue would leak out onto the benches. So they covered all of the benches with sheet metal. But the sheet metal, they then put new projects on that, so that had tons of glue. So every day I'd be picking more glue off of this bench It was fun. That was just a little something, and he'd always say, "Don't pick the glue off the benches." Just while he's not looking, it was just something to do. So he always did that. So anyway, this project, the plexiglass. So we had a drill press, and we had to drill holes in the plywood. So the best way that he found to do this was to use a very low speed on the drill press and run the thing, whatever you call it, to lower the bit down into the material. Do that very slowly. Well, first and foremost, the power switch on this thing was broken. So we had a thing we had to like shove in there to turn it on. The off button still worked. The key for the chuck, this had a keyed chuck, was stolen, missing, thrown out, didn't exist. So the way that he would change bits in it would be 2 pairs of slip joint pliers. This is the equipment that we had. You can see this isn't going well. So anyways, it was my turn to drill. Now, other kids had drilled, and what would happen invariably, what we'd do is we'd put the plexiglass between 2 pieces of plywood and drill through that. And it was all C-clamped together. So it was a plywood, plexiglass, plywood, C-clamped together. Nice and tight, very nice, tidy sandwich, if you will. And we had the drill on low, and I'm going slow. And I get through the wood, we're going in the plastic, and I'm going real slow, real slow, real slow, and it's drilling through, crack. And the plexiglass cracked. I went through 3 of them. I can't tell you how many the other kids went through. Not saying I was an ace at this, but between the bad equipment and substandard everything else, it's really no surprise. But I finally got one done that had maybe a little bit of a spider web coming out around the holes, and we put neon bulbs in there and a fuse with a fuse holder, and we had to make a circuit board. We etched a circuit board. So we got a piece of circuit board material. I don't know what it's made out of. Like I actually know what I'm doing. Circuit board material, and it was covered in copper. And then we would take masking tape and completely mask off the entire surface of it. And then you would take a dull X-Acto knife and you would design your own circuit board. And there were guidelines, there was maybe a picture or something like that, and you'd kind of do that, and there were certain things that had needed wires connected between different pads and stuff like that. And this was the most basic of basic stuff. Well, Jesus. Oh, man. As far as the etching process went, it was pretty good after getting through the very dull X-Acto knives and getting the pieces that you want etched away, exposed, leaving the masking tape on the parts that you still want copper on. And then you'd give them to Dr. Soman, and he'd put them in an etch-it solution, and it would etch the board, or eat away the exposed copper, leaving the stuff with the masking tape. And then they'd be washed off and given back to you after they're dried, and you would peel off the masking tape, and now you would have your circuit board that you would then take to the drill press and drill through so you can put wires in and components in. The drilling of the circuit boards went just fine. That you just zip right through, no problem. Went right through that. And then came actually wiring this thing up. So there were capacitors, I don't know if there were any resistors in it, can't remember. And orange neon bulbs in their own holders with wire leads attached that were in different colored plastic housings. So you had a green one with an orange neon bulb in it, and a blue one with an orange neon bulb in it, and a red one with an orange neon bulb in it, and a clear one with an orange neon bulb in it. And we had to wire this stuff up. How do you do that? Solder. So we had to learn how to solder. No matter what this man taught us, the kids in the class, like Faten, were trying to hold the soldering iron and drip the solder on there as if it's like glue or something. Even though he specifically told them not to do that and showed them how to do it. He said, hold the iron against the pad and the wire and feed the solder in, and it's going to flow and create a soldered connection to the board. Now again, this is very basic entry-level stuff. The stuff I get from China does better with their soldering. I shit you not. It was absolutely abysmal how bad all of the kids in this class were at soldering. And they had solder splashes on their boards and stuff like that. So anyway, it's finally all put together, ready for a smoke test. So we plug it in, and the idea behind the capacitors is it would make the lights blink, the neon lights blink. They didn't blink. I had one that would sort of rapidly, pulse, but the rest pretty much stayed on solid. It was really an effort in futility, or an activity in futility. Nobody's project did well, but he didn't take points off if yours didn't flash or anything, because it was just a hodgepodge of parts that we had left over, and we used those, and that's what we ended up with. The neon bulbs all lit up, but most of them didn't flicker or flash or do anything. And years later, I don't know, I was feeling generous at the time. My cousin was over, and I gave it to him. And he had it in his room for a few years. And I don't know what happened to it. It's probably been long thrown out. It kind of sucks. I'd almost like it back just to say I made this. Not proud of it because, I didn't know much and it didn't really work right, but that part wasn't really my fault. But anyway, there was that. Then there was a kit that we put together where you could, it was like a variable resistor box, I think. And it had a circuit board that was pre-etched, ready to go with all the holes in it. And maybe a transistor, perhaps a battery went in it. I'm not sure. There were a couple of LEDs on it. And 2 alligator clip wires, and you could hook it in series with something, and it had a dial that you would turn that had 6 or 8 positions with a label, an adhesive label that you'd affix to it, and it would say the ohm rating of the various resistors. So you had to be able to read and decode these resistors, solder them in to the board, and make this thing work. Mine did. And compared to everybody else, I mean, there were a number of kids whose boards they bridged solder joints, and it was like I said, the work, it was abysmal, the work. I don't know how this man did it. Seeing all of these kids just fail this class after he did an absolutely exemplary job teaching and demonstrating. And he gave us scrap to work on. It's not like he just gave us that to solder with and learn as you go. I mean, it was learn as you go, but you had practice on other stuff. And like I said, it was all just leftover bullshit equipment and parts and stuff like that, like whatever they could get their hands on dirt cheap, shit like that. But it was still a very fun class. I remember definitely did enjoy that. It was an easy class. I absolutely aced it, of course, because like I said, this was the most basic of basic stuff. And the projects were a fun challenge, we can say. The resistor box one was probably one of the more complex ones, and God, if I could only remember some of the other stuff we made. Yeah, I don't know. And there was also one other little tidbit. I forget if that was my last class of the day or if it was earlier. I think it was the last class of the day. And I said to Soman, I said, listen, I have this device at home that I was given years ago. And it used to work, it no longer does. I was wondering if you could troubleshoot it and see what the deal is. Or if we could perhaps build a new one. And the reason I wanted this is because this was I was in 11th grade. I was going to be eventually getting a car soon. And what this device was, it was a little black box. And in the center had a tiny red LED. And had a couple of wires. 4, maybe 4. And when you would apply 12 volts to it, the light would light up. The other 2 wires you ran out of this thing under the hood of the car and into your windshield washer bottle reservoir. So you would put it in there, and the liquid inside would allow current to pass between these wires, and it would turn off the LED. As you would use up the Smurf piss, eventually the wires would be exposed, no current is flowing between them, and the light would turn on, letting you know that your washer fluid is low. I was given this as a kid, and it did work, and then it was put aside. I got it when I was like really young. And I never blew it up. I only ran it on 12 volts like you were supposed to. And it was just put to the side. And I was thinking about, I'm going to be getting a car, soon. That would be nice to put in it. Cars at the time, or at least the ones that I would be driving, didn't have such a thing. But it didn't work. So I said to Soman, can we troubleshoot this thing? And I had tried it. Now, some people are going to say, well, the Smurf piss has different properties to it because of the additives and whatnot. So plain water may not work. But it used to work because I used plain water because I didn't have a car with Smurf piss. And I brought it in one day and we played around with it, and after school, and he sat there, he took the time with me, and we just worked on that, and basically he came up with, I don't know. And that was one thing that I never did have in my old Chevy. Oh well, it's not like I really needed it. I mean, for how much I would use the Smurf piss, wasn't much. But yeah, it would run out. It has small jug. Cars today, you could buy a gallon jug of that shit, pour it in, there's room to spare in there. But nowadays, or back then rather, the old Chevy, it just had, 2 quarts at the, not even 2 quarts, 1.5 quarts maybe it would hold. And that was it. But it was right on top. You just open the cap, dump the shit in, you're good to go. So anyway, lost out on that one. He couldn't figure it out. I don't know if we opened it up or even tried to build another one or what the deal was, but I never did have that in my car. Whatever. But that pretty much was it as far as electronics class. Definitely a worthwhile experience. Glad I took that class. I took it because I had to take an elective, and it was a great class to take because I aced it. Anyway, that's going to wrap up this episode of Old War Stories with Uncle Jay. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure you click like, make sure you click subscribe, and take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.